They called this 75-year-old crazy. Then she saved a life in the flood. Welcome back and enjoy the story. A deafening crack of thunder jolts Fiona Xavier from her afternoon nap. Through her window, she watches dark clouds gather over Meadowbrook, the sleepy coastal town she's called home for 5 decades. The weatherman predicted light rain, but Fiona's arthritic knees have been aching for days. A warning sign she's learned to trust more than any forecast. She picks up the phone to warn her neighbors about a potential flood, just as she's done every spring for the past 15 years. But this time, unlike the previous false alarms, no one answers her calls. The rumbling sky mirrors the unease in her chest as she gazes at the framed meteorology degree hanging on her wall, a reminder of a time when people actually listened to her warnings. Fiona runs her fingers through her silver hair, feeling the weight of her 75 years pressing down on her shoulders. Outside, the first heavy drops begin to fall, drumming an ominous rhythm on her roof. Something feels different today. Something feels worse. Fiona's weathered hands tremble slightly as she reaches for her emergency notebook, the margins filled with calculations and predictions that no one in town has taken seriously in years. The wind howls through the cracks in her window frames, carrying with it memories of the last major flood, the one no one saw coming except her. Fiona straightens her back, determination setting in her pale blue eyes. They might call her crazy, but today she won't let them ignore her, not when lives could be at stake. Fiona has become somewhat of a local joke among the younger residents of Meadowbrook. The Flood Witch, they call her behind her back, sometimes even to her face. Her persistent warnings about the town's deteriorating flood barriers have earned her eye rolls from local officials and dismissive pats on the shoulder from her own adult children. Mum's getting paranoid in her old age, they whisper to each other during family gatherings, thinking she can't hear them. Last month, during the town hall meeting, Fiona had stood up with her meticulously prepared presentation about the weakening dam structure upstream. Mayor Galloway had smiled that politician's smile, all teeth, no sincerity, and thanked her for her colourful contribution before moving on to discuss the upcoming summer festival. The memory still burns. Fiona's daughter Patricia had been there too, sinking lower in her seat with each word her mother spoke. Later, she'd suggested that perhaps it was time for Fiona to consider a nice retirement community where you won't have to worry about these things anymore. The implication was clear. Stop embarrassing us with your obsession. But Fiona knows what they don't. She remembers the Great Flood of '82, before the barriers were built, when 3 families lost their homes and 1 child nearly drowned. She'd been young then, still building her reputation as a meteorologist. No one questioned her expertise back then. They respected it, sought it out. What changed wasn't the accuracy of her predictions, but the town's willingness to listen to an aging woman. The rain beats harder against her windows now, and Fiona watches as her garden begins to flood, water pooling around her carefully tended rose bushes. She picks up the phone again, dialing her son Michael's number, preparing herself for the dismissive tone she knows will come. "Mom, it's just a spring storm," he says, his voice carrying the familiar note of exasperation. The weather service hasn't issued any warnings. Fiona bites back the urge to remind him that she was once part of that weather service, that her methods have always been more precise for this specific geographical area. Instead, she simply says, "Please be careful, Michael. Keep your family away from the Riverside Park today." The silence on the other end speaks volumes. When he finally responds, his voice is gentle in that particular way people use when humoring someone they believe is slightly unhinged. "Sure, Mum. We'll stay. Love you." The line goes dead, and Fiona is alone again with the storm and her certainty. If you are enjoying the story, Type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type ZO. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. What they don't know is that Fiona was once the town's most respected meteorologist before retiring. Her understanding of Meadowbrook's unique geographical vulnerabilities stems from decades of professional observation, not senility. After her husband's departure 15 years ago, Fiona channeled her loneliness into studying the town's outdated flood defense system, creating detailed maps and prediction models that now fill her modest home. On her desk sits the framed photograph of a younger Fiona accepting the Regional Excellence in Meteorology Award, her smile bright and confident, her husband Thomas standing proudly beside her. That was before he left her for his administrative assistant, a woman 20 years younger, with no interest in weather patterns or flood predictions. The irony wasn't lost on Fiona. Thomas had always complained that she was too obsessed with her work, too focused on storms and rainfall measurements. When he left, the storm inside her nearly drowned her completely. But Fiona has always been a survivor. She channeled her grief into her research, spending hours in the town archives studying historical flooding patterns, comparing them with recent data, and creating a comprehensive model specific to Meadowbrook's unique valley position between three converging watersheds. The town council had once commissioned such a study, but abandoned it due to budget constraints. Fiona completed it anyway, without payment or recognition. Her living room wall is covered with maps marked with pins and notations, tracking the gradual weakening of the northern levee and the increased silt deposits reducing the river's capacity. In her garage, she keeps her own rain gauge and barometric pressure monitor, recording daily readings in notebooks labeled by year. These aren't the scribblings of a paranoid old woman. They're the methodical recordings of a scientist who never stopped being one, even when the world stopped seeing her that way. Fiona glances at her most recent calculations, comparing the current barometric pressure with historical data from the '82 flood. The numbers confirm what her knees have been telling her for days. This storm has the potential to be catastrophic. The rain is falling at twice the rate predicted by the National Weather Service, and the already saturated ground from last week's showers can't absorb much more. She tries the mayor's office again, but the call goes straight to voicemail. Through her rain-streaked window, she watches as her neighbors go about their business, dashing from cars to buildings with newspapers held over their heads, treating this as just another inconvenient spring shower. They don't see what she sees, that the darkest clouds are still gathering to the north, directly over the watershed that feeds into Meadowbrook's river system. Something needs to be done, and it's clear that no one else is going to do it. With determined movements, Fiona pulls her emergency evacuation plan from her desk drawer and begins gathering the essentials she's kept ready for this very scenario. Will anyone listen now, when the water starts to rise? Or will they continue to dismiss her as the crazy old flood witch until it's too late? As the thunder crashes overhead, Fiona makes a decision. Whether they believe her or not, she won't stay silent. Not today, not when she knows what's coming. The rain begins, as a gentle patter but quickly intensifies. Fiona pulls out her handwritten evacuation plan and starts packing essentials. She tries calling the mayor's office one last time, but is redirected to voicemail. With a sigh of resignation, she loads her elderly cat, Nimbus, and emergency supplies into her 20-year-old station wagon and heads toward the community center on higher ground. The windshield wipers struggle against the downpour as Fiona navigates the increasingly treacherous roads. Water has already begun pooling at the low points, confirming her worst fears. The storm drain at the corner of Elm and Pine is completely overwhelmed, just as she predicted in the report she'd submitted to the town council last year, the report that now sits gathering dust in some filing cabinet. Nimbus meows nervously from his carrier in the passenger seat, and Fiona reaches over to reassure him. "It's all right, old boy. We've weathered storms before." The irony of her words isn't lost on her as she maneuvers around a fallen branch. The radio crackles with static as the local station finally issues a flood advisory. Hours too late, in Fiona's professional opinion. The river will have already breached its banks in the northern section of town. She thinks of the families living in the new riverside development, the one she specifically warned against when they were breaking ground 5 years ago. The developers had dismissed her concerns with patronizing smiles, assuring everyone that modern engineering had accounted for all possible scenarios. But they hadn't accounted for the changing climate patterns Fiona had been tracking, or for the degradation of the natural wetlands that once absorbed excess rainfall. As she approaches the intersection near Willow Creek, Fiona gasps at the sight. Before her, what should be a small, manageable stream has transformed into a raging torrent, water rushing over the low-lying bridge with alarming speed. She slows the car, calculating whether she can safely cross. The community center is still a mile ahead, and to reach it, she must get past this obstacle. Just as she's about to make the attempt, a flash of movement catches her eye. Through the curtain of rain, she spots a figure struggling with a stalled car on the opposite side. The water is rising around the vehicle's tires, and the driver appears to be attempting to push it to higher ground, a dangerous proposition given the current's strength. Fiona's heart races. She knows better than most how quickly floodwaters can sweep away a car, and with it any passengers inside. Without hesitation, she pulls her station wagon to the safest spot she can find and reaches for her rain poncho. "Sorry, Nimbus," she murmurs to her cat. "Duty calls." The rain hits her like needles as she steps out, the wind nearly tearing the car door from her grasp. Bracing herself against the elements, Fiona makes her way cautiously toward the edge of the rising water. "Hey," she calls out, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "Leave the car. It's not safe." The figure turns, and Fiona sees now that it's a young woman, soaking wet and visibly pregnant. A fresh surge of urgency propels Fiona forward. This is no longer about being right or proving her predictions to a town that wouldn't listen. This is about saving a life, maybe two. The water tugs at her ankles as she carefully navigates to the edge of the flooded section, waving frantically to catch the young woman's attention. Will she heed Fiona's warning, or will she too dismiss the concerns of the town's notorious flood witch? As their eyes meet across the rising water, Fiona realizes that in this moment, her reputation, her ignored warnings, her years of meticulous research, none of it matters. What matters is what she does next. What matters is that the life she now sees in danger is more important than being proven right. The road ahead, quite literally washed away. Fiona must find another path, not just to safety, but to someone who needs her. Perhaps this, after all the years of shouting into the void, is her real purpose today. But wait. As the water surges, Fiona notices 2 teenagers trapped on the playground equipment at Willow Creek Park. The boy and girl, no more than 16, cling to the top of the monkey bars as the floodwaters swirl beneath them, rising inch by inch. With each passing minute, they wave frantically at Fiona's car, their faces pale with fear. Fiona now faces an impossible choice. Head directly to the pregnant woman struggling with her car, or first attempt to reach the stranded teenagers. Every second counts in a flash flood situation, and she knows better than anyone how quickly the rising waters can become deadly. The weight of 3 lives now rests on her shoulders, and she must act decisively. Which path will she choose, and will her years of preparation be enough for what lies ahead? On her way, Fiona notices a young woman attempting to push her stalled car through rapidly rising water. The woman is visibly pregnant and in distress. Despite knowing how dangerous it is to stop, Fiona pulls over. The pregnant woman introduces herself as Annie, a new resident who moved to town just 3 months ago. Fiona insists Annie abandon her car and come along to safety. The car can be replaced, Fiona says firmly, her voice carrying over the howling wind. You and your baby cannot. Annie hesitates, her hands protectively cradling her swollen belly. She's new to Meadowbrook, hasn't yet heard the whispers about the eccentric old lady who cries wolf every spring. All she sees is a determined elderly woman offering help when she desperately needs it. But everything I own is in there, Annie protests, glancing back at her modest sedan. My hospital bag, the baby's first clothes. I understand, Fiona interrupts gently, watching the water creep higher around the car's tires. Her experienced eye can see that they have minutes, not hours, before the vehicle becomes completely unstable. But right now, we need to focus on getting you to higher ground. Trust me, I've seen how quickly these waters can rise. Something, in Fiona's tone, the calm authority perhaps, or the unwavering certainty, convinces Annie. She nods, reaching for her purse from the front seat, before following Fiona back to the station wagon. Nimbus greets them with an indignant meow as they settle in, Annie's drenched clothes immediately soaking the upholstery. That's Nimbus, Fiona explains with a small smile. He's not fond of unexpected guests or storms, but he'll warm up to you. Annie manages a weak laugh, wincing suddenly as she shifts in her seat. The momentary grimace doesn't escape Fiona's notice. Are you having contractions? She asks sharply, her mind already calculating this new variable into their precarious situation. Just Braxton Hicks, I think, Annie replies, though uncertainty flickers across her face. I'm not due for another 2 weeks. Fiona nods, but concern settles in her chest as she carefully turns the car around, searching for an alternate route to the community center. The road they'd planned to take is now completely submerged. Decades of studying this town's topography comes in handy as Fiona navigates through side streets, taking the long way up to higher ground. As they drive, Annie explains that she moved to Meadowbrook after her husband's military deployment overseas. Gary's family is from here originally. We thought it would be a good place to raise a child. Quiet. Safe. The irony of her words isn't lost on either of them as they pass a row of shops with water already lapping at their doorsteps. It usually is, Fiona assures her, though her eyes remain fixed on the treacherous road ahead. But the town has ignored some critical infrastructure issues for too long. She doesn't add that she's been the lone voice, warning about these exact issues for years. There's no satisfaction in being proven right under these circumstances. Annie studies her rescuer's profile, noting the determination etched into every line of her face. You seem to know a lot about this. Were you some kind of emergency responder? The question brings a wry smile to Fiona's lips. Close. I was the senior meteorologist for this county for almost 30 years, specialized in flood prediction models for the coastal valley systems. So you knew this was coming? Annie asks, her voice rising slightly. Did the town issue an evacuation order? Fiona's hands tighten on the steering wheel. How does she explain that her warnings have been systematically ignored for so long that she's stopped expecting anyone to listen? That the current mayor considers her a nuisance, an embarrassing reminder of problems he'd rather not address during his administration. The official warnings sometimes lag behind what local conditions indicate, she says diplomatically. I've found it's better to be cautious. Another contraction seems to grip Annie, stronger this time, and she inhales sharply, clutching the daughter handle. Fiona pretends not to notice, not wanting to alarm the young woman further, but her mind is racing. The community center is still 10 minutes away, assuming the roads remain passable. If Annie is truly in labor, they're facing a far more complicated scenario than Fiona had anticipated. Through the rain-streaked windows, Fiona can see that much of the town is already succumbing to the floodwaters. Streets she's known all her life have transformed into rushing streams. The trees that line Meadowbrook's main avenue bow and sway. In the violent wind, their roots gradually loosening in the saturated soil. This is what she feared, what she tried to prevent. Yet even now, with disaster unfolding around them, Fiona feels a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, she's not shouting unheeded warnings into the void. She's doing something concrete, something real. She's helping someone who needs her. As they approach the hill leading to the community center, Annie lets out another, muffled cry of pain. This time, Fiona can't ignore it. "How far apart are those contractions?" she asks calmly, though her heart races. Annie's frightened eyes meet hers. "Maybe 15 minutes? But it's too early. It can't be happening now." Fiona nods reassuringly, though her own thoughts are far from calm. "Babies have their own schedules, dear. Don't worry, we're almost there." The community center comes into view at last, its brick structure solid against the storm. But as they pull into the parking lot, Fiona's heart sinks. The building stands, dark and silent. There are no emergency vehicles, no signs of an evacuation center being established. Either the town hasn't recognized the severity of the situation yet, or they've chosen a different location without informing residents. Annie seems to read the concern on Fiona's face. "Is something wrong?" "No," Fiona lies, forcing confidence into her voice. "Everything is going to be fine." But as another thunderous crash sounds overhead and Annie doubles over with another contraction, Fiona wonders if she can keep that promise. At the community center, they find the doors locked. No evacuation order has been issued. Fiona uses her old employee key from when she volunteered there years ago, a key she was never supposed to keep. Inside, they discover the building has been partially converted into an art gallery, with valuable paintings lining the walls. The emergency supplies Fiona expected to find have been removed to make space for the exhibition. "This is the mayor's wife's pet project," Fiona explains, her voice tight with barely contained frustration as she surveys the transformed space. Where there should be cots and emergency supplies, there are now pedestals displaying abstract sculptures and walls lined with framed artwork. The spring exhibition was all she talked about at the last town council meeting. Apparently, bringing culture to Meadowbrook was more important than maintaining the emergency shelter. Annie waddles behind her, one hand supporting her lower back, the other still clutching her purse. "So there's nothing here, no medical supplies?" The tremor in her voice betrays her growing fear. Fiona's mind races. She knows this building intimately from her years volunteering for community emergency preparedness, before the current administration decided her services were no longer required. There should be a storage room in the back, unless that too has been repurposed. "Let me check something," she says, projecting a confidence she doesn't entirely feel. They make their way through the gallery space, their wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Nimbus has escaped his carrier and trots alongside them, his tail twitching with displeasure at their unfamiliar surroundings. The emergency exit signs cast an eerie green glow through the darkened building. The power must have gone out recently. "There!" Fiona points to a door partially hidden behind a large canvas depicting what might be a storm at sea, or possibly just angry brushstrokes. She can't tell. "That used to be our supply storage. The door is locked, but Fiona's keyring contains more than just the main entrance key. Years of being prepared means having access when you need it." The lock clicks open, revealing a much smaller storage space than Fiona remembers. Many of the shelves stand empty, but to her immense relief, some emergency supplies remain, pushed to the back as if forgotten rather than intentionally preserved. She quickly inventories what they have: a few blankets, some bottled water, a basic first aid kit, an emergency radio, and a couple of flashlights. Not the fully stocked emergency shelter it should be, but better than nothing. "We can make this work," she tells Annie, who has leaned heavily against the doorframe, her breathing labored. "Let's get you comfortable first." They arrange blankets in the main gallery space, creating a makeshift resting area away from the windows, which rattle ominously with each gust of wind. Fiona helps Annie ease down onto the pallet, then sets about examining the first aid kit more thoroughly. It's woefully inadequate for delivering a baby, but she's worked with less in other emergency situations. The radio crackles to life when she turns it on, but the signal is weak. Through the static, she catches fragments of an emergency broadcast. Extensive flooding, Meadowbrook area, roads impassable, emergency services, delayed response. The words confirm what Fiona already knows. They're on their own, at least for now. Annie moans softly, curling onto her side as another contraction grips her. They're coming more frequently now, perhaps 10 minutes apart. Fiona places a comforting hand on the young woman's shoulder. "I need to know exactly what you're feeling, Annie. Don't downplay anything." Annie's eyes, wide with fear, lock onto Fiona's. "It hurts worse than I expected, and I think my water broke when we were coming inside. This changes everything." If Annie's water has broken, labor has definitely begun, regardless of her due date. Fiona takes a deep breath, centering herself. "All right, I need you to listen to me very carefully. This baby might come before help arrives, but I want you to know that you're not alone, and this isn't my first emergency." She doesn't mention that her emergency medical training is decades old, or that she's only assisted with 2 births in her life, both in controlled environments with proper medical equipment. Instead, she projects the calm authority that once made her the person everyone in town turned to when storms threatened. "We're going to get through this together." Outside, the storm rages with increasing fury. Rain lashes against the windows in sheets, and the wind howls like a living thing. But inside, Fiona creates a bubble of calm competence. She arranges their meager supplies, fashions clean cloths from the art gallery's supply closet, sterilizes what instruments she can from the first aid kit using their precious bottled water, and prepares for what may be the most important challenge of her life. As she works, she tells Annie about her years as a meteorologist, about the storm she's predicted and the lives she's helped save. She doesn't mention how the town gradually stopped listening, how her expertise became a punchline rather than a resource. Those stories won't help them now. What matters is maintaining Annie's trust and confidence. What matters is getting her and her baby safely through what's coming. A particularly violent thunderclap shakes the building, making them both jump. In the momentary flash of lightning that follows, Fiona catches sight of the floodwaters outside. They've risen dramatically, already covering the bottom steps of the community centre. The building stands on raised ground, but even so, the rate of increase is alarming. "Are we safe here?" Annie asks, having followed Fiona's gaze to the window. The question hangs between them, heavy with implications. Fiona considers sugarcoating the truth, but decides Annie deserves honesty. The building is on the highest ground in town. The water would have to rise another 6 feet to reach the main floor, which is possible, but unlikely even in the worst-case scenario. She doesn't add that they're already experiencing what she would classify as a worst-case scenario. Besides, she adds with forced cheerfulness, help will surely come before that happens. Annie nods, wanting to believe her. Another contraction seizes her, stronger than the last, and she reaches out blindly. Fiona takes her hand, allowing the young woman to squeeze as tightly as she needs to. When it passes, Annie looks up at her with determination mingling with her fear. "I don't even know your name," she realizes suddenly. "After all this, and I never asked." Fiona smiles gently. Fiona Xavier. Most people in town call me the Flood Witch. The what? Annie's confusion is almost comical. It's a long story, Fiona replies, checking the flashlights to ensure they have working batteries. The short version is that I've been warning about the possibility of this exact flood scenario for 15 years, and no one took me seriously. Annie studies her face in the dim light. Well, I'm taking you seriously now, Fiona Xavier, and I'm very glad you found me today. The simple acknowledgement brings an unexpected lump to Fiona's throat. How long has it been since someone truly listened to her, truly valued her knowledge? Let's focus on bringing your baby into the world, she says, her voice slightly hoarse. Though this probably isn't the birthing suite you imagined. No, Annie agrees, attempting a brave smile, but at least it has interesting art. They both glance at the nearest painting, a chaotic swirl of blues and greys that suddenly seems eerily prophetic of their current situation. The moment of levity is brief, interrupted by the most intense contraction yet. Annie's face contorts with pain, and she cries out. Fiona checks her watch, noting the frequency. Things are progressing more quickly than she anticipated. Annie, she says, keeping her voice steady, I think we need to prepare for the possibility that your baby might arrive very soon. Is there anyone you want me to try calling? Your husband? Family? Annie shakes her head, tears mingling with sweat on her face. Gary's overseas. My parents are in Arizona. There's no one else, just us. Then we'll manage just fine, Fiona assures her, though her own heart races with the enormous responsibility. She helps Annie into a more comfortable position and begins to prepare herself mentally for what lies ahead. Behind the calm exterior she presents to the frightened young woman, Fiona's mind works furiously. The storm outside, the flood rising around them, the baby coming too early, the lack of proper medical supplies or professional help. Any one of these factors would be concerning. Together, they're terrifying. But terror won't help them now. Knowledge will, experience will, determination will, and those, at least, Fiona has in abundance. As the night deepens around them, and the storm continues its relentless assault on Meadowbrook, two women, strangers until today, prepare to face one of life's most profound moments together, surrounded by the rising waters of a disaster that, unpredicted, and both must now survive. But first, let's see if the police officers, who are responding to a routine call on the other side of town, manage to escape the rapidly rising waters. They've been caught unaware on a low-lying stretch of road, and their patrol car is now taking on water. With the radio system compromised by the storm, they have no way to call for backup. Will they be able to reach safety, and could they potentially bring help to Fiona and Annie? Or will the raging floodwaters claim more victims before this night is over? As night falls, the power goes out across Meadowbrook. Cell service becomes spotty, then non-existent. Fiona's battery-powered radio reveals that the main road into town has been washed out. Help won't arrive until morning at the earliest. From the community center's windows, they watch as water creeps steadily up the streets below. In the dim light of their emergency flashlights, Fiona studies Annie's face, noting the increasing tension around her eyes and mouth. The contractions are coming every 7 minutes now, each one causing the young woman to curl forward, her knuckles white as she grips the blanket beneath her. "Tell me about yourself, Annie," Fiona urges, partly to distract her and partly because human connection seems vital in this moment of crisis. "What brought you to Meadowbrook, besides your husband's family connections?" Annie takes a shaky breath as a contraction subsides. "I'm a librarian, or I was, back in San Diego. I was supposed to interview for a position at the Meadowbrook Library next week." She laughs weakly. "I'm not sure I'll make that appointment now." "The library would be lucky to have you," Fiona says, dampening a cloth with precious bottled water to wipe Annie's forehead. Margaret Winters has been running it single-handedly since her assistant retired last year. She's been campaigning for more staff for ages. Annie raises an eyebrow. You know everyone in town, don't you? When you've lived somewhere for 50 years, faces become familiar. Fiona doesn't add that in recent years, those familiar faces have often looked right through her, as if her age and her persistent warnings had rendered her invisible. The building creaks ominously as another gust of wind batters it. Nimbus, who has been exploring the gallery, darts back to Fiona's side, his yellow eyes wide with feline anxiety. It's all right, she soothes, though whether she's reassuring the cat or Annie or herself isn't entirely clear. The radio sputters with static, occasionally offering fragments of emergency broadcasts. The news isn't good. The storm has affected 3 counties, overwhelming emergency response capabilities. Meadowbrook, being smaller and more remote than neighboring communities, is low on the priority list for rescue operations. A sudden gasp from Annie pulls Fiona's attention back. This contraction is different, more intense, causing the young woman to arch her back in pain. I feel pressure, Annie says through gritted teeth, like I need to push. Fiona's heart races. It's happening faster than she expected. With calm she doesn't entirely feel, she helps Annie into a better position and checks her progress as discreetly as possible. The baby is definitely coming, she confirms, forcing steadiness into her voice. Annie, I need you to trust me now more than ever. I've assisted with births before. It's not entirely a lie. She did help deliver 2 babies during her brief nursing training 5 decades ago, before she switched to meteorology. She only prays those ancient memories will serve them now. I trust you, Annie whispers, her face pale but determined. I don't have much choice, do I? The half-joke breaks. Some of the tension, and Fiona manages a smile. Not really, no. But I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to make sure you and your baby come through this safely. Outside, the storm continues its assault on the small town. Through the windows, they can see that the water has now completely submerged the first floor of buildings across the street. Cars float like abandoned toys, occasionally bumping against lampposts or shop fronts. The community centre's first floor remains dry, but Fiona can't help calculating how quickly that might change if the rain continues at its current rate. She pushes those thoughts aside, one crisis at a time. Right now, bringing Annie's baby safely into the world takes precedence over everything else. The next 2 hours pass in a blur of focused intensity. Annie proves remarkably strong, following Fiona's instructions with determination despite her fear and pain. Fiona works methodically, drawing on long dormant knowledge and instincts she didn't know she still possessed. They use the gallery's decorative fabrics to create clean surfaces and additional padding. As sculptors' small hand tools, carefully sterilized with their limited supplies, serve as makeshift medical instruments when needed. Throughout it all, Fiona maintains an outward calm that belies her internal anxiety. Every sound from the storm outside makes her tense, wondering if the water is rising faster than she calculated, if the building's structure will hold, if help will arrive in time, if something goes wrong. But nothing can go wrong. She won't allow it. As Annie's labor intensifies, Fiona tells her stories about the town in better days, about the weather patterns she studied all her life, about Nimbus as a scrappy stray kitten who showed up on her doorstep during another storm 15 years ago. The talking seems to help, giving Annie something to focus on between contractions. Almost there, Fiona encourages, as she sees the baby's head beginning to crown. You're doing wonderfully, Annie. Just a few more pushes. Annie nods, exhausted, but determined. Her hair is plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her knuckles are white where she grips the blankets. I can't believe this is happening here, she gasps. My mother-in-law is going to be so disappointed. She had the hospital room all planned out, with balloons and a photographer. The absurdity of the situation strikes them both, and they share a moment of strained laughter that quickly turns into a groan as another contraction takes hold. "Push now, Annie," Fiona instructs, her focus absolute. "That's it. Good. Again." The moment when the baby finally emerges into Fiona's waiting hands feels nothing short of miraculous. The tiny girl lets out a lusty cry that echoes through the art gallery, a sound of pure life amidst the chaos of the storm. Fiona works quickly to clear the baby's airways and wrap her in the softest fabric they could find. Ironically, an art smock left behind by one of the gallery's instructors. "She's perfect," Fiona announces, her voice catching with emotion as she places the swaddled infant on Annie's chest. Absolutely perfect. And she is, small but vigorous, with a shock of dark hair and a determined set to her tiny features. Annie's exhausted face transforms with joy as she cradles her daughter. "Hello, little one," she whispers. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Fiona busies herself with the necessary post-birth procedures, keeping a careful eye on both mother and baby. The storm still rages outside, and they're still cut off from help. But in this moment, the miracle of new life outshines everything else. When Annie looks up at her, tears streaming down her face, Fiona feels something shift inside her, a healing of an old wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. "Thank you," Annie says simply. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me today." Fiona gently brushes the damp hair from the young woman's forehead. "Don't think about that. You did all the hard work. I just helped a little." Outside, the rain continues to fall, but there's a subtle shift in its rhythm, perhaps lessening slightly. The battery-powered radio occasionally breaks through with updates, suggesting that emergency response teams are mobilizing, though still unable to reach Meadowbrook due to washed-out roads. Annie studies her newborn daughter's face with wonder, counting tiny fingers and toes. "She needs a name," she murmurs, looking up at Fiona. "I had a list, but none of them seem right now." Fiona busies herself cleaning up with their limited supplies, giving mother and child a moment of privacy. "Names have power," she says softly. "Choose one that reflects her strength. She's already survived her first natural disaster after all." A smile touches Annie's lips. "You're right." She's quiet for a moment, then says, "What about Flora? It means flower, something beautiful that grows even after storms." "Flora," Fiona repeats, testing the name. "I think it's perfect." As dawn breaks with Fiona's newborn daughter making her entrance into the world. As Fiona cleans and wraps the infant in her own cardigan, they hear helicopters overhead. The flood has affected 3 counties, but Meadowbrook has suffered the worst. Damage due to its inadequate barriers, exactly as Fiona had predicted. The sound of rotors cutting through the morning air is the sweetest thing Fiona has heard in years. She moves carefully to the window, mindful not to disturb the exhausted Annie and baby Flora, who have finally drifted to sleep. The floodwaters have receded slightly, no longer rising with the ferocious speed of the night before, but much of Meadowbrook remains submerged. Through breaks in the clouds, she can see a Coast Guard helicopter hovering over the town square. "They're coming," she tells Annie, who stirs at her words. "Help is coming." It takes another hour before the rescue team reaches them. The community center's roof provides a safe landing zone for the helicopter, and the skilled rescue workers are clearly surprised to find not just 2 survivors, but 3. "Ma'am, you delivered this baby." One of them asks Fiona, professional assessment mixing with disbelief as he checks Annie's vitals. "We delivered her together," Fiona corrects gently, her hand on Annie's shoulder. The young paramedic shakes, his head in amazement. "In the middle of the worst flood this region has seen in 50 years. That's Remarkable. As they prepare mother and baby for transport, Fiona gathers their few belongings. Nimbus, unhappy about the commotion, has taken refuge in his carrier, his yellow eyes glaring reproachfully at the strangers invading their space. "You're coming too, right?" Annie asks, suddenly alarmed at the thought of separation. Fiona hesitates only briefly. "Of course," she says, ignoring the twinge in her arthritic knees. There will be time enough later to worry about her partially. Flooded home, the research she's left behind, the vindication she never wanted to come at such a cost. For now, what matters is staying with Annie and Flora until they're safely in medical care. The helicopter ride offers a bird's-eye view of the devastation below. Streets Fiona has walked for decades now resemble canals, with rooftops and treetops rising like islands from the murky water. The riverside development she warned against is completely submerged, though thankfully evacuated in time. The old dam, which she'd identified as a weak point years ago, has partially collapsed, releasing even more water into the already saturated valley. "You knew, didn't you?" Annie asks quietly, following Fiona's gaze. "You knew this would happen someday." Fiona nods, her expression somber. "I knew the risk was there. I tried to tell them." When rescue teams finally reach the community centre, they're astonished to find Fiona, Annie, and the healthy newborn. The media descends on the story of the crazy old lady who not only predicted the disaster, but delivered a baby during the worst flood in regional history. Fiona becomes an overnight sensation, but the attention makes her deeply uncomfortable. At the regional hospital, the staff quickly takes charge of Annie and Flora. Both are remarkably well, considering the circumstances, a testament to Fiona's care during those critical hours. While Annie undergoes a thorough examination, Fiona finds herself surrounded by reporters who've gotten wind of the dramatic rescue and birth. "Miss Xavier, is it true you've been warning about flood risks for years?" one eager journalist asks, thrusting a microphone toward her. "How did you know the pregnant woman needed help?" demands another. "Were you scared when you realized you'd have to deliver the baby yourself?" The questions come rapid-fire, overwhelming in their intensity. Fiona, still wearing the same clothes she had on when the storm began, her silver hair disheveled and dark circles under her eyes, recoils from the attention. "Please," she says wearily, "this isn't about me. It's about a community that wasn't prepared for a predictable natural disaster. It's about infrastructure that was allowed to deteriorate despite warnings. And most importantly, it's about a brave young mother and her beautiful baby girl who deserve privacy and rest." The hospital administrator, sensing her distress, intervenes to shoo away the media. "Ms. Xavier needs medical attention herself," he announces firmly. "No more questions today." In the relative quiet of an examination room, Fiona finally allows herself to acknowledge the exhaustion and strain of the past 24 hours. A young doctor checks her over, expressing concern about her elevated blood pressure and the signs of exposure from her time in the storm. "You should stay overnight for observation," he suggests, "especially given your age and the stress you've endured." Fiona starts to protest, but realizes she has nowhere else to go. Her home, if still standing, is likely damaged by floodwaters. Besides, she's not ready to leave Annie and Flora just yet. "My cat," she says suddenly, remembering Nimbus. "Is he okay?" The doctor smiles reassuringly. "The rescue team brought him in his carrier. He's being looked after by our staff. Quite a vocal fellow, I hear." This coaxes a small smile from Fiona. "He's never been fond of change." As she settles into a hospital bed, the adrenaline that has carried her through the crisis begins to ebb, leaving her bone-weary. Through the window, she can see emergency vehicles continuing to arrive, bringing more flood victims for treatment. The scale of the disaster is still unfolding, and she feels a complex mix of emotions: grief for her community, relief that she and Annie survived, vindication that her warnings had been justified, and anger that it took a catastrophe for people to finally listen. A nurse brings word that Annie is asking for her. Despite her fatigue, Fiona makes her way to the maternity ward, where Annie sits propped up in bed, baby Flora sleeping peacefully in a clear bassinet beside her. "The doctors say we're both doing amazingly well, thanks to you," Annie says, reaching for Fiona's hand. "They said without proper medical care, things could have gone very differently." Fiona squeezes her hand gently. "You're stronger than you know, Annie. Both of you are." A television mounted on the wall plays footage of the flood recovery efforts. The camera pans across familiar streets now unrecognizable underwater, then cuts to the mayor giving a press conference, his face grave as he declares a state of emergency, the very declaration Fiona had urged him to make preemptively days ago. Annie follows her gaze to the screen. "Is that the mayor, the one who ignored your warnings?" Fiona nods, too tired for bitterness. "He did what most people do, hoped for the best rather than planning for the worst. Well, I hope he's paying." "Attention now," Annie says with unexpected fierceness, protectiveness for her new friend evident in her voice. In the weeks that follow, as the town rebuilds, Fiona retreats to her partially damaged home, avoiding the spotlight. Annie, however, refuses to let her fade into obscurity. Having named her daughter Flora in Fiona's honor, she convinces local journalists to investigate why the town ignored Fiona's warnings for so long. Their investigation uncovers that the mayor had redirected funds meant for flood barrier maintenance to the art gallery project at the community center, a pet project of his wife's. His administration had actively worked to discredit Fiona's warnings to cover up their misappropriation of funds. The renovations to Fiona's modest home proceed slowly. Water damaged the first floor, destroying many of her books and some of her precious research, but her neighbors, many now seeing her in a new light, have rallied to help with the cleanup. Nimbus supervises these efforts with feline disdain, clearly displeased with the disruption to his routine. Fiona herself has been quieter than usual, processing the mixed emotions that come with vindication at such a cost. She's declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with being portrayed as either a hero or a victim. The truth, as always, is more complicated than headlines can convey. The doorbell rings one rainy afternoon as Fiona sorts through salvaged photographs. Annie stands on the porch, baby Flora bundled against her chest in a sling. "We've been discharged with a clean bill of health," she announces, stepping inside. "And I wanted you to be the first to know. I got the library job." Margaret said, "They needed someone resourceful in a crisis, and apparently I qualify." Fiona's face lights up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful news, Annie. And how is this little one doing?" She gently touches Flora's cheek, marveling at how much the infant has grown in just a few weeks. "Thriving," Annie says proudly. "The doctors can hardly believe she was born during a natural disaster with no medical assistance." They settle in Fiona's kitchen, the only room mostly restored to its pre-flood state. Annie bounces Flora gently as she grows more serious. "Did you see the newspaper today? They're calling for the mayor's resignation. The investigation into the misused flood prevention funds is gaining traction." Fiona nods, stirring her tea. "I saw." "And?" Annie prompts. "Doesn't it feel good to be vindicated?" Fiona considers this. "I would have preferred to be wrong," she says finally. "I never wanted this disaster to happen, even if it proved my point." Annie's expression softens. "Of course you didn't. But now that it has happened, don't you think you have a responsibility to help ensure it never happens again?" Before Fiona can respond, there's another knock at the door. This time, it's a representative from the State Emergency Management Agency, a serious young woman with a portfolio tucked under her arm. Ms. Xavier, I'm Jordan Chen from SEMA. We've reviewed your flood prediction models and maps, and we're very impressed with your methodology. We'd like to discuss implementing your system across the region. As public outrage grows, Fiona is approached by the State Emergency Management Agency. They've reviewed her detailed flood prediction models and maps and want to implement her system across the region. After decades of being dismissed, Fiona's expertise is finally recognized, but she hesitates to step back into a professional role at her age. In her living room, Jordan Chen presents a formal proposal as Annie sits nearby, quietly supportive, Flora sleeping against her chest. We've never seen such accurate, localized prediction models, Jordan explains, spreading out printouts of Fiona's work. Your understanding of how the region's watershed functions is exceptional. With your permission, we'd like to digitize these models and incorporate them into our statewide early warning system. Fiona studies the young woman's earnest face, noticing the respect in her eyes, so different from the condescension she's grown accustomed to. You understand I developed these as a private citizen? I haven't had access to professional resources for years. That's what makes it even more impressive, Jordan assures her. Imagine what you could do with our support and technology. The offer is tempting, the opportunity to make a difference, to protect communities beyond just Meadowbrook, to have her work valued again. But doubt creeps in. I'm 75 years old, Miss Chen. Most people my age are well into retirement. Annie shifts Flora to her other shoulder. Age hasn't dulled your mind or your judgment, Fiona. If anything, it's enhanced them. You predicted this flood when no one else could or would. We're not asking you to work full-time, Jordan clarifies. We're proposing a consultant position, 3 days a week, helping us implement your models and training our staff to understand the unique aspects of coastal valley flood patterns. Fiona looks around her recovering home, at the walls still bearing watermarks, at the boxes of research she's salvaged. What would Thomas think, seeing her considering a return to professional work after all these years? The thought brings a small smile to her face. He never did understand her dedication. May I think about it, she asks, not ready to commit, but no longer automatically dismissing the possibility. Of course, Jordan says, leaving her card. Take all the time you need. After Jordan leaves, Annie fixes Fiona with a determined look. You're going to accept, right? Fiona sighs. Annie, I appreciate your faith in me, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this job anymore. The world has changed so much since I was actively working, which is exactly why they need you. Annie insists, her voice rising enough to make Flora stir. She lowers her tone, continuing with quiet intensity. Fiona, you saved my life and my daughter's life. You did that because you never stopped being vigilant, never stopped learning and observing, even when everyone dismissed you. Flora deserves to grow up in a world where that kind of wisdom is valued, not ignored until it's too late. The simple truth of Annie's words strikes Fiona deeply. It's not about vindication or recognition. It's about making a difference while she still can. It's Annie who ultimately convinces her to accept, pointing out that age has only enhanced Fiona's wisdom, and that little Flora deserves to grow up in a safer community. Together, they form an unlikely friendship as Fiona begins consulting for the agency 3 days a week. The town council, facing pressure from residents, formally apologizes to Fiona and establishes a new emergency response protocol based on her recommendations. Fiona's home, damaged beyond repair in the flood, is replaced with a modern cottage through a community fundraising effort, spearheaded by some of the very people who once mocked her. The groundbreaking for Fiona's new home coincides with her first day at SEMA. She stands at the edge of her property, watching as volunteers and contracted workers prepare the foundation. The mayor, looking considerably humbled since the public revelations about the misappropriated funds, approaches her carefully. "Ms. Xavier," he begins, his usual bluster replaced with genuine contrition. "On behalf of the town council and the citizens of Meadowbrook, I want to formally apologize for dismissing your expertise and warnings. We should have listened." Fiona studies the man who once called her our resident doomsayer during a town meeting. She could be bitter, could remind him of every specific warning she gave that he ignored. Instead, she simply nods. "Thank you, Mayor Galloway. I hope this means the new flood barrier project will proceed without further delays." He flushes slightly at the gentle reminder. "Yes, absolutely. The state has fast-tracked the funding, and your recommendations are being implemented in full. No compromises this time." The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Fiona's daughter, Patricia, who has been notably more present in her mother's life since the flood. Their relationship remains complicated. Years of dismissing her mother's concerns can't be undone overnight, but there's a new respect in Patricia's eyes as she watches her mother confidently discussing technical specifications with the construction foreman. "Mum," she says when there's a break in the conversation, "Michael and the kids and I were thinking, maybe you'd like to have Sunday dinner with us this weekend. The grandkids want to hear about your new job." The invitation, casual as it seems, represents a significant shift. Sunday dinners had once been a regular tradition, abandoned when Fiona's obsession with flood risks became too uncomfortable a topic. Now, her vindication has created space for reconciliation. "I'd like that," Fiona says simply, accepting both the invitation and the implicit apology it represents. Her first weeks at SEMA are both challenging and exhilarating. Technology has evolved dramatically since her professional meteorology days, but the fundamental principles of weather patterns and flood behaviors remain the same. Jordan proves to be an attentive student, eagerly absorbing Fiona's knowledge of local topographical vulnerabilities. "You've created something remarkable. Here," Jordan tells her one afternoon as they review the digitized versions of Fiona's hand-drawn models. "Most prediction systems focus on major waterways or coastal zones. You've mapped how small tributary systems can compound flooding risks in valley communities that are typically overlooked." Fiona feels a warm glow of professional satisfaction. She hasn't experienced in decades. "I had time on my hands," she says modestly, "and motivation. When you live in a flood zone, you pay attention to the details." Annie visits often, sometimes bringing Flora to the office with her on Fiona's working days. The baby becomes something of a mascot for the department, her presence a constant reminder of what's at stake in their work. As Fiona's confidence in her new role grows, so does her willingness to step back into community life. She accepts an invitation to speak at the Meadowbrook High School Science Fair, where students have developed projects on climate change and disaster preparedness, many inspired by her story. "The most important thing to remember about science," she tells the attentive audience, "is that it doesn't care whether we believe in it or not. Water will flow downhill, storms will form when conditions are right, and barriers will fail when they're neglected. Regardless of our politics or preferences or budgets, our job is simply to observe carefully, predict accurately, and respond appropriately." The students, unlike the adults who dismissed her for years, listen with rapt attention. Among them, Fiona notices several young women taking particular interest. Perhaps one of them will become the next meteorologist or hydrologist for Meadowbrook, carrying on the vigilance when Fiona no longer can. 6 months after the flood, Meadowbrook hosts a dedication ceremony for its new state-of-the-art early warning system. Fiona, standing with Annie and baby Flora, cuts the ribbon while her formerly dismissive children watch with newfound respect. The system bears a simple plaque, The Fiona Xavier Early Warning Network, because sometimes crazy is just another word for right. The gathering is smaller than a typical ribbon cutting in Meadowbrook, the community still recovering from both the physical and emotional impact of the flood. But those present represent a cross-section of the town, officials, rescue workers, business owners and ordinary citizens whose lives were upended by the disaster and who now look to the future with cautious optimism. Mayor Galloway, significantly, humbled by the public backlash and subsequent investigation into his administration's fund misappropriation, keeps his remarks brief. Today, we acknowledge not just a new technology system, but a new approach to community safety, one that values expertise, respects science, and prioritizes preparation over reaction. We also honor the woman whose persistence may well have saved countless lives, even when we lack the wisdom to heed her warnings. Fiona's own speech is characteristically straightforward. She doesn't dwell on past dismissals or current vindication. Instead, she focuses on the future, on the importance of maintaining the new warning system, of continuing to improve the town's infrastructure, of passing knowledge to younger generations. This isn't about being right, she concludes, her voice strong despite her years. It's about being ready. Nature will continue to test us, but together we can meet those tests with knowledge, preparation, and community solidarity. As the applause rises around her, Fiona feels Annie's hand slip into hers, squeezing gently in silent support. On her other side, Patricia and Michael stand with their children, their presence a bridge being carefully rebuilt across years of misunderstanding. The plaque catches the afternoon sunlight, the words, "Because sometimes crazy is just another word for right," gleaming with particular brightness. Fiona hadn't approved that part, had argued against it, in fact, but the committee had insisted. "It's important to acknowledge that we were wrong and you were right," the chairperson had explained, "that sometimes what looks like eccentricity to the uninformed is actually insight." After the ceremony, as the crowd disperses and workers begin dismantling the small stage, a courier approaches Fiona with an envelope. "Ms. Xavier, this came for you at the agency office. Ms. Chen thought you might want to see it right away." Curious, Fiona opens the envelope to find a formal letter from Northeastern University, requesting her participation as a guest lecturer in their Advanced Meteorology and Disaster Prevention program. "They want me to speak about my work," she says, disbelief coloring her voice as she shows the letter to Annie. "Of course they do," Annie replies matter-of-factly. "You're the woman who predicted the unpredictable and delivered a baby during the worst flood in regional history. You're practically a legend." Fiona laughs, still uncomfortable with this new public identity, but gradually accepting its reality. "Hardly a legend, just a stubborn old woman who paid attention." The letter bears one final surprise, a personal note from the professor extending the invitation, explaining that he had been a young student evacuated during Fiona's controversial hospital evacuation 40 years ago, the very incident that had cost Fiona her nursing career but had ultimately saved dozens of lives from an unsound building that partially collapsed the following day. "I never knew," Fiona whispers, her hand trembling slightly as she reads the note again. "All these years I thought that incident was just a professional failure." "Seems like you have a pattern of being right when others are wrong," Annie observes, gently, as Fiona celebrates her 76th birthday, surrounded by new friends and reconciled family. She reflects on how a disaster became the catalyst for healing old wounds and creating new beginnings. Her journey proves that wisdom doesn't expire with age, and that sometimes the most important thing isn't being believed, it's continuing to speak the truth anyway. The birthday party is held in Fiona's new cottage, a thoughtfully designed home that incorporates special features for aging in place while maintaining the charm of her previous house. The community fundraising effort had exceeded expectations. allowing for quality materials and craftsmanship that should withstand future weather events. Annie arrives early to help with preparations, Flora now crawling energetically and fascinated by Nimbus, who has adapted to the new space with surprising ease. The old cat maintains a dignified distance from the baby, but watches her with what almost resembles affection. "She'll be walking before we know it," Fiona observes, setting out plates for the cake that Patricia has promised to bring. "And talking," Annie adds with a smile. "Her pediatrician says she's advanced for her age. Must be all the intellectual conversation she's exposed to when we visit you at work." The guests arrive gradually. Fiona's children and grandchildren, Jordan from SEMA, neighbours who have become friends rather than distant acquaintances, and even Mayor Galloway with a slightly forced smile but genuine congratulations. The house fills with conversation and laughter, the atmosphere warm with reconciliation and new beginnings. After dinner, as Patricia serves the birthday cake she's baked, Michael raises his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he says, his voice carrying unexpected emotion, "who taught us that persistence isn't stubbornness, expertise isn't arrogance, and age isn't irrelevance. We didn't always listen as well as we should have, but we're listening now." Fiona blinks back tears, overwhelmed by the journey from isolation to connection, from dismissal to respect. She thinks of Thomas, who left because he couldn't understand her dedication, and wonders what he would make of this gathering, of the way her supposed obsession has transformed into recognized wisdom. As the evening winds down and guests begin to depart, Annie helps clear dishes, while Flora naps in the portable crib they now keep at Fiona's house. "The university called today," Fiona mentions casually. "They've expanded their invitation. They want me to develop a short course on localized flood prediction models, not just give a single lecture." Annie grins, unsurprised. "Of course they do. Your methods saved lives. They will again." Fiona passes her a stack of plates, considering the new direction her life has taken. "I never expected this, you know. At my age, I thought I was just shouting into the void." "Instead, you were building a legacy," Annie says simply, "one that Flora will grow up knowing about." Later, after everyone has gone and the house settles into quiet, Fiona sits on her new porch with Nimbus purring in her lap. The night is clear, stars visible in a way they only are after storms have washed the atmosphere clean. From here, she can see the river in the distance, now contained within its properly maintained banks, flowing peacefully through the valley. The flood brought destruction, but also clarity, washing away pretenses and revealing both weaknesses and strengths in her community and family. Like the land itself, they are slowly recovering, building something more resilient where old structures failed. Fiona strokes Nimbus's fur, feeling a contentment that has eluded her for years. Tomorrow she will go to SEMA, where her expertise continues to shape regional safety protocols. Next week, she'll have dinner with her family, rebuilding relationships, long strained by misunderstanding. And soon, she'll stand before university students, sharing knowledge that bridges past and future. At 76, Fiona Xavier is not at the end of her story, but at the beginning of a new chapter, one where her voice is finally heard, her wisdom valued, and her presence in the community recognized, not as an eccentric burden, but as an essential resource. The path forward isn't perfectly clear, just as no weather prediction can be absolutely certain. But Fiona has always understood that certainty isn't the point. Awareness is, preparation is, and the willingness to speak truth, even when no one wants to hear it. As she watches the stars, Fiona makes a quiet promise to herself, to Annie, and Flora, to her reconciled family, and to the community that finally recognizes her worth. She will continue to watch the skies, track the patterns, and sound the alarm when necessary. Not for vindication, but for protection, not to be right, but to keep others safe, because sometimes crazy is just another word for right, and sometimes the most important forecast is the one that changes the future, not just predicts it. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.